Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the panel Reverse Engineering the Brain. We have four panelists. Irina, Rish is still connecting. We are having some technical difficulties, but we'll get started. My name is Cisek. I'll be moderating, and the goal of this is to discuss the issues and the challenges of trying to understand the brain and how AI can help in that endeavor. We have four panelists who span the range of experimental to theoretical neuroscience, as well as AI and data science. Some of them you've already seen. I will start by introducing Jim DiCarlo. So many of you have just seen Jim's wonderful talk. But for those who are just joining us now, Jim is an investigator at MIT McGovern Institute, where he's the Peter de Flores Professor of Neuroscience in the Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences. His background is in biomedical engineering as well as neuroscience at Johns Hopkins with Ken Johnson and John Mounsell. And his work concerns understanding the neural mechanisms of visual information processing in the primate ventral stream. So his work involves neurophysiological recording throughout the brains of primates, as well as inactivation studies, as well as attempts to model these processes through artificial neural networks. And as many of you saw, setting sort of a stage for how to move forward in understanding the brain together with building models of the brain. Another speaker is Surya Ganguli, who is an associate professor at applied physics at Stanford, where he leads the neural dynamics and computational lab. Surya began his academic career with a triple major in physics, mathematics, and electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. Since that apparently wasn't challenging enough, he then completed a PhD in string theory at Berkeley, followed by a postdoc in theoretical neuroscience at UCSF. So really his experience spans the fields of neuroscience, mathematics, machine learning, physics, and understanding and improving how both biological and artificial neural networks learn emergent computations. He has received a number of prestigious awards, including a Schwartz Fellowship in Computational Neuroscience, a Burroughs Wellcome Career Award, a Sloan Fellowship, a McKnight Scholar Award in Neuroscience, a Simons Investigator Award, and an NSF Career Award. And he's really one of the rising stars in the field of computational neuroscience from a theoretical and neuroscientific perspective. Joshua Vogelstein, you've already seen. There he is. Josh is an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Johns Hopkins, with joint appointments in applied mathematics, statistics, computer science, electrical and computer engineering, neuroscience, and biostatistics. So his work is in the fields of biomedical data science, focusing on the statistics of brain networks and connectomes. He has a background in biomedical engineering, as well as a master's degree in applied mathematics and statistics, and a PhD in neuroscience. So again, like many of our panelists, a really broad view of the field from all sides. Irina Rish, who I'm hoping will be appearing with us soon. Irina Rish is an associate professor in the computer science operational research department here at the University of Montreal. And she's also a core faculty at the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. Her background is in applied mathematics from Moscow Gubkin Institute, as well as master's and PhD degrees in computer science, focusing artificial intelligence from University of California, Irvine. She started her career as a research scientist at the IBM Watson Research Center, where she worked on various projects at the intersection of neuroscience and AI, and led the Neuro AI Challenge. For her work, she received multiple awards, including the IBM Research Accomplishment Award in 2009. In 2019, we were fortunate to recruit Irina to the University of Montreal and Mila, where she holds a Canada Excellence Research Chair in Autonomous AI, as well as a Canadian Institute for Advanced Research Canada AI Research Chair. Her interests include continual lifelong learning optimization algorithms for deep neural networks, sparse modeling and probabilistic inference, dialogue generation, biologically plausible reinforcement learning, and dynamical systems approaches to brain imaging analysis. And so, unfortunately, she is still unable to connect, perhaps changing computers. But in the interest of time, we're going to move forward, and we're going to try to wrap up the panel at 12:40 or 12:45. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, welcome to all of you, and thank you for agreeing to be on the panel. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask a few questions, just sort of openly to the panel, anybody go ahead and chime in and respond. While we're doing that, though, please ask your questions in the Ask a Question box. And I can already see you're way ahead of me. There's already 8 in there. So that gives you some time to upvote the questions and formulate them, etc. How the discussion goes. We'll get started. Again, thanks all for coming. One question. Actually, I'm gonna jump to one question that I really would like to hear your opinions on, and that is that it's one of the challenges that I think we're facing is that we're gathering a lot of data at a very high pace, and many people have said that the rate at which we're gathering the data outpaces our ability to make sense of it. And first of all, do you agree? And if so, what do you see as a way of dealing with that challenge? I mean, should we not be getting as much data? Is there a way to prioritize which data do we really need, and which data should we base our modeling most on? And so maybe if any of you want to get started, please go ahead. I know Jim actually had an answer to this one, so maybe I'll put you on the spot, Jim. How do we prioritize the data that we look at?
Well, I'm not sure. Can you hear me okay, Paul? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple things in there. I think that's very subfield dependent when you say how much data. I mean, so for instance, if you're trying to model human language, it's hard to get ECOG data. I mean, you could say there's always, or primates even, like we can get a lot of data, but not as much as you can get at sort of high resolution, thousands of cells in a rodent, say. So I think the systems matter a lot when we sort of contextualize that. So that's why I would say we're still data limited. One way I can think about that is like at some point we're going to start taking the metrics and plugging them, optimizing against the data directly. Others have done that in other subfields. I mean, Surya's done work like that. I think we haven't really turned that crank because we don't think we have the data on the primate side to really maybe do it. We're starting to, but if you really want to optimize against the data, you need lots of data. We're worried that we may not have enough on the primate, for example. On humans, I would say similarly. But in terms of prioritize, the obvious thing is you take the models as like, tell us, if we could agree as it feels like these are the 2 different models or the families of models that we're most trying to distinguish among. The trouble is there's many, many models. So even using the models to sort of drive that is sort of not obvious how to do that. And you sort of asked Josh this question at the end of his talk too. It's like, how would we use the models given a very vast space of models? That's a tricky question, but the answer is somehow the model should tell us what data to go get, but we're not really executing that in a sort of deep, meaningful way yet. Again, maybe subfield dependent. People can point to examples where they are, but I think that's the conceptual way it should be done. But in practice, how to do it with large families of ANNs, I think we need some help. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Surya and Josh could weigh in. I don't think. Anyway.
Yeah. I think it's not necessarily about quantity, of course, but quality, right? Like, well, first of all, I mean, we are collecting a lot of data. It would be great if, that data were just made publicly available so that the world could go to town on it. And that's happening so much more often now than even like 10 years ago, right? Which is really exciting. The other thing is, moving towards more complex naturalistic tasks, large scale recordings. I think it's incredibly exciting, and just pushing in those directions would be very nice. And I think there's a lot of work to do in active learning of optimal experimental design as well, which is along the lines of what Jim was saying in terms of using the model to decide what data to collect. So I think this sort of confluence in our ability to build models and collect large-scale data sets, we need to marry them much more tightly going forward. But I think it's very exciting. I don't think experimentalists should stop collecting data. I think theorists and experimentalists should talk more and design better experiments.
Yeah, I'd like to, I was hoping to disagree, but I unfortunately agreed with Surya. I just like disagreeing with you so much, but I actually think getting more data is highly problematic. I mean, for a number of reasons, including social costs, economic costs of getting the data, and what we get from that data. From my perspective, sorry, is there a bad echo?
No, it's good.
Oh, okay. From my perspective, we want to design better experiments. And that's related to my talk where I was talking about the ways we now think about learning as just, we want to understand the trajectory of learning as we get more and more training samples. Like, that's the kind of experiments that I think in neuroscience would benefit from a lot, is having sequences of different tests, looking at how animals learn across samples. And that kind of data may require only a few samples. And we would learn a lot from each sample. If you have crappy data, then each data point adds epsilon information. And if you have really good data, it adds lots of information. So I think we want to ask better questions and get smaller amounts of data that are more informative.
Okay, another question that I had for all of you is really just sort of personally, what do you not know that you wish you knew? And I actually would like I'd like to maybe start with Surya on this in particular, because you actually know a great variety of mathematical approaches. And I always feel that no matter how much math I learned, I always feel like I just don't know enough. I know there's fields of physics and differential geometry that I probably should learn about, and nonlinear control theory and all these things that I don't know. And I'm just wondering, what do you see as one of the fields that you yourself would like to know more about? But more so, what should we all know more about that we don't really pay attention to so much in this field, mathematically, but also experimentally?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can tell you some theoretical machinery that I wish we as a community had in our hands, which would be basically algorithmic methods for coarse graining complex computational systems in an interpretable fashion, right? So I think this goes to the core of the very nature of explanation in neuroscience, right? Like, if you were to give me a vertical model of the brain where every synapse and every neuron were accurately modeled and it could reproduce behavior and so forth, that's great. That's a model of the brain. It's very accurate and so forth. But we'd be loath to say that we understand how the brain works in that respect, right? Feynman said something really nice about what it means to understand complex systems or complex equations. It means you can say something about the solutions to those equations without actually solving them. So for example, in fluid mechanics, we have Navier-Stokes equations. They're completely accurate prediction of fluid flows in many, many situations. But we also have lots of intuition. We can say how fluids will flow in certain situations without numerically solving Navier-Stokes equations. So once we have really good models of the brain, like for example, like Jim DiCarlo's models of ventral visual system, right? We would like to be able to coarse grain them and simplify them while retaining predictive accuracy, but being a little bit simpler, and try to have algorithmic methods for negotiating this Pareto optimal trade-off between model complexity and model accuracy. And understanding will lie in our ability to say what's the most important aspects of a particular model to get most of its predictions, maybe not all of them, right? There are various fields that have taken approaches to this, like control theoretic model reduction and control theory, information bottleneck and information theory, renormalization group in physics, and so forth. They're all very specialized to their particular domains. Knowledge distillation and machine learning. But I think there's more that we could do there. And we would also want interpretable model reduction. So that's something I think I would love to have.
Interesting. Maybe you can send me some references. How about you, Josh and Jim? If you had more time, what is it that you'd want to learn?
One thing for me would be really nice to learn is everybody else is children's names and their family names. I feel like we pretend like we're doing this objective science, and we don't say we in the papers, and we make claims like this is how the brain works, rather than this is how this one brain worked that we measured. And it's just, we're humans, we're in a community, let's work together and be a family. And then one thing I'd like us to learn better as a family is regularization. You know, the community in machine learning and optimization put a lot of energy in understanding regularization with constraints and priors and penalties and things like that. But it turns out, it seems like what the brain is doing and what modern machine learning is doing is very different. There's this implicit regularization that comes from kind of stochastic search and backprop and really big architectures and early stopping and things like that, which are different kinds of regularization that we have very limited theory to understand. And it seems like that's a lot of what the brain is actually doing, and a lot of what modern machine learning is doing, and we have no real conceptual understanding of how that works.
Yeah. Jim?
I'll pick up on both those points. I mean, I agree with one of the things you'd like to have. What Surya is talking about is some model distillation to something that is, the reason he's motivated, I think, by those questions is you're trying to generalize outside the system. I mean, if you think about it, it's like if you had a copy, it's like, well, what does that tell us about how we could build a different version, right? So I think that's where that points in the deepest sense. And I think you'd love to get there. And that's what I meant by theories when I gave my talk. But there's another version where it's just, okay, my job is to just get a good model of the system and then hope that Surya and others might be able to use that. Like, that's how I think of my job. And then when I answer that question, like, what do I need to learn that I don't have? I think it's really questions from other fields, like how do physicists and climate scientists manage complex models? Like, our weather prediction gets better and better. I don't know how they get that done and executed in a social framework. This relates to Josh's point about community. How do engineers keep the iPhone design working? Like, that's a multi-level, like, they have to integrate all that information and get rewarded for doing it and get paid, and they're part of a big machine that makes the iPhone work. But the models are going to be like that. They're not going to be discoveries. They're going to be big, complicated, integrated systems that rewards have to be shared among a community of people. And so just lessons of how to do complex system modeling and management, both socially and technically, sort of where I feel like I want to spend time just learning how other fields have done that, because that's not the science many of us were trained in. We're like, oh, discover X. I think the word discovery sort of sends us astray. It's like, how do we just work together to build X and test X and as a community? So let's pick you up on Josh's point about community. I mean, I think there's social lessons there that have to be learned to really meet this challenge of understanding the brain. But both are good. Both are needed.
Yeah. So anyway, I'd just like to welcome Irina. Thanks for making it. I don't know if you heard the questions, but I was hoping to hear some of your opinions. All right. So I'll just repeat the last one we were just discussing, was the question of what field maybe of biology or mathematics that you would like, that you don't know, that you think you'd like to know. If you had more time on your hands, you know, what is it that you would like to learn? And also, but what do you think that the field might be missing? You know, aspects of mathematical approaches and other fields that you think might benefit what it is we're trying to do here in reverse engineering the brain.
Right. Okay. So I guess the question is more about the field of neuroscience rather than field of AI.
Both, actually. Maybe AI needs to know something more that it's unaware of. Likewise, in neuroscience, are we neuroscientists, for example, interpret their data using certain mathematical techniques? Maybe there's others that we should be using. Likewise, people building artificial systems maybe should know more about some neuroscientific data. What, in your opinion, you'd like to? What would be the next thing you'd want to learn if you didn't?
Yeah, I think ideally you would like to consider all the fields that ever existed and that ever tried to study intelligence. And I would start with philosophy, actually, not with math or neuroscience, but with philosophy. And I mean, there is lots of work that people are not aware of, especially in AI. And I mean, it's understandable because it's just like too much out there. But I think what I would suggest, yeah, indeed, you can take several fields that may all give you some ideas about how things that you intuitively would call intelligence can arise. And you can even start way before brain and neural networks. Like I really like Michael Levine's talk several years ago at New Rips, what bodies think about. Because if you look into how the multicellular organisms take shape, you start asking questions like, this is a system that clearly has memory. Like, I know, butterfly rises from kind of totally different, like larva and so on. And where this memory is stored? Is it like, it's definitely, there is no neural system there. It's somehow stored in the properties of dynamical system that makes this multicellular organism. Plus, it's adaptive. Plus, you can program it. And that's what Michael Levine is doing, right? He's programming those biological networks, creating viable solutions that evolution never found, like two-headed worms, showing that what evolution found is just one solution and perhaps maybe not the optimal one. So then you start thinking maybe you can do the same thing with intelligence. Like, who said that this particular combination of parameters in the model gives you the best performance? So maybe you can, I mean, we don't want to create multi-headed worm or whatever, but you get the idea. So what I'm trying to say that, unfortunately, there are all this wide range of fields, but they kind of trying to ask similar questions. And if we could take, as I said, philosophy, perhaps even, well, partially religion, or at least common sense part of the religion, like Buddhism. That's empirical science of brain functioning, of mind, which was developed for thousands of years. And there are quite interesting empirical observations there about how it works, how to change the way it works. It can be quite useful, but it's written in very different language. Then you have biology, which also relates to things even before nervous system, as I said, at a different level. So there are these disparate disciplines, and ideally, I mean, there is this approach in AI, which probably would be applicable here conceptually. You look at very different kind of environments, and you try to find invariant model, invariant representation, invariant predictor, essentially trying to find what's invariant in all these different fields about trying to understand intelligence. And you try to kind of distill that. So I think that would be great, but it's very difficult by the nature of this whole kind of thing. There are just too many different fields. But I think focusing on invariant representation and invariant model, like invariant risk minimization type of methods, quote unquote, but applied to different scientific disciplines, or not just scientific, that we're studying intelligence. I would love to do that, but it's kind of...
Well, I can tell you, I agree with you, Irina, and I can see others agree with you. But it looks like it stirred up a nice debate going on in the chat, at least. Some people saying yes, absolutely, +1. Jovo and Jarkranka were out there, but some don't. Sarah Sola, for example, said that definitely would not go to philosophy. It's not science.
Philosophy is more important than science. Philosophy is where science started.
I had a
I think perhaps it's a question of methodology and the pitfalls that one goes into. But anyway, I think Surya picked up on what Sarah was saying. So maybe Surya, you could.
I tend to agree with Sarah a bit more. I mean, I honestly haven't found philosophy that useful, and those parts of it that I do find useful just seem to be careful science. But here's a joke. When I was visiting Harvard, an enterprising Harvard undergrad once told me, he was a philosophy undergrad, he told me, scientists are just the plumbers of knowledge. The philosophers are the ones who really erect the framework of knowledge.
Yes,
and
agree.
But philosophers haven't accomplished that much. I mean, the scientific method is a really nice result. We all abide by it. Logic is nice and so forth. But I think maybe we're getting into a semantic discussion about philosophy versus science, and I just don't find that useful. I think any good scientist is implicitly a philosopher by some definition of philosophy, but what is that definition of philosophy and so forth? I've never read that many. I mean, I did concentrate in philosophy as an undergrad, but I kind of ran away from it. It just wasn't very useful for me.
Well, that's precisely why we need more courses on philosophy, both for neuroscientists and for AI geeks. They need to read philosophy.
Well, I guess my point,
That's a prerequisite.
the point that I've heard, which I think I rather like, is if you don't do philosophy, you just do bad philosophy. Because like it or not, we sort of absorb certain philosophical ideas, and if you don't think about it carefully, then you're not aware of those ideas and the assumptions that they lead you to. But you know, it's sort of like by looking at it, you realize your own priors, etc.
Exactly.
And anyway, it looked like there's certainly quite a lot of discussion on the chat.
Yes, yes, there are pros and cons, but basically what I'm trying to say, well, science is often, okay, there are always questions like why, what, and how. And philosophy gives you why. And without why, what, and how are lost.
Science can also answer why questions. I mean,
look, I don't disagree with the goals that Irina's saying. I just think to me it's exposing a kind of an underlying schism, which is like, what are we really after? Like
exactly
as a healthcare deliverer, like, but I mean, some of us are more after the how questions because there are brain disorders, there are needs to build systems, there are sort of near-term human needs that do not, in my mind, depend on the why. Now we can take guesses as to maybe why
they are answers to why. It's one of the answers
I need
to why.
Just like the genome, I need the human genome, even if it's not the perfect genome. So I think there's like that kind of philosophy that has to be brought to bear on some of these questions, like who's paying us to do this and why, and maybe that's a discussion that then grounds this question, right? I agree with you. As a scientist, I would like to understand all the possible forms of intelligence. But as a human on this planet with limited resources, I need to help people, and that means get to the solution. I can't have my ivory tower kind of like goals. I need to actually deliver for the society. So I think that has to be kept in mind. And the history of science says that the theory follows the delivery in all domains of science. So I think keep that in mind, right? So I'm Surya's shaking his head. I knew that would provoke him. But I think that's sort of important to keep in mind.
Except in physics. I mean, their theory
yes and no.
came before.
Okay. I think Jim really pointed out important dichotomy. There is this whole scale at which you can answer the question why, or kind of, again, back to Michael Levine, you can think about basically what each cell or multicellular organism or society of such things, what is the objective, like what they're doing, what they're optimizing? Well, you can say that when cell is alone, it's trying to survive and thrive and maintain homeostasis, and that's the objective, but it's objective applied at the small scale, temporally and spatially. But when the cell becomes part of the organism, then the same objective is applied, it's just the scale of that objective function is larger spatially and also temporally because the larger organism may live longer. You can get the idea further. What we're trying, I think, to decide, and that's really a good open question. Like we all want to do good. The question is, there is this bunch of scales. You can do something immediately, or you can try to do something that maybe like 30 years from now will be very important. And you need to do both. So I don't know if we assign weights to these different kind of scales, but if we just try to do what's useful for society now, then somebody has to do and think about what's going to happen like 50 years from now, right?
Yeah.
You need both.
All right. Well, this is definitely saying the word philosophy certainly gets a debate going right away, which is great. However, I do want to give a chance to some of the people who posted questions. But I'm actually going to jump down to a question that's being repeated from previously that we can get to from John Krakauer, who was asking Jim, but I think this applies to all of you, so please comment, is what people often mean by understanding is some compressed articulable principles that go beyond saying that this artificial neural network now matches the ventral stream. After all, we now have two things to understand, whereas before we had one. The ANNs are still susceptible to adversarial attack, so they are perceiving different things. So are we really on the way to a theory of primate perception? So I guess this is really for Jim, but I hope that the rest of you can offer your opinions as well.
Well, Okay, I was just seeing something in the chat here from Josh, but I got to read that. But let me just, Josh posted something. But okay, let's take Hodgkin-Huxley. Now we have a Hodgkin-Huxley model. So now we have two things. So why is that better than one, right? Like, so what, like any model we build always has the second thing. It's the model, right? And the thing we're debating is like, do we want models that have beautiful math, or there's certain debates about how people want the models to look. But the reason the models have value is their generalization power. And math is one way. There's certain ways that some models will generalize better than others, and their test is their generality. And I think that's what Surya's after when he's like, let's make a condensed model, because he's trying to get something that will generalize. And that's why, and Hodgkin-Huxley has some generalization power. It also offered some insight into the mechanisms beneath that were not understood at the time. So again, it's just a bridge, right? A model is a model. It allows you to then bridge towards these other things, but it takes all the data and compresses it towards something that is now something that you can hand out and talk about and debate. It's not the end. It's just the necessary next step. So that's my position on that. It's like, if we had a silicon copy, we'd be way better off. And I'm trying to get towards a silicon copy. And if you disagree, if you think we should keep, euthanizing animals and putting electrodes in to get, like, if you think that's how we should keep doing it, I don't think that's ethically even the right stance. We want to get to that model, and it's just the next bridge. So again, attacking the model as it's like, well, that's a copy, so it's useless. I'm like, I think that's sort of missing so much that you get from that model that you would not have without it, and putting too much weight. I'd like to understand, what's the alternative? Like, again, I don't know what the alternative is even being proposed. Like, so take any field of science, you always go through a model. It's just we're debating.
I guess the question is, F equals MA is a model, kind of like an artificial neural network of the differential stream, but it's a much easier one to handle, right? And we feel like we have a certain understanding with that kind of model, whereas an artificial neural network with 12 weight matrices, you look at that and maybe just don't feel the same satisfaction of having that compressed representation or compressed understanding.
But F equals MA doesn't build the bridge or predict what the weather's going to be tomorrow. So I think that's what I said about complex system challenges. It's like, you can have conceptual understanding, but you go too simple and you lose the practicality. So this is what Surya is talking about too. And like, how do we have? That's why I brought up the iPhone. It's like, it doesn't. You got to build the bridge at the end of the day, or build the iPhone, right? And if you want to stay in, you're going to get trapped in a place if you don't keep that goal in mind. And Surya was talking about exactly that balance between simplicity and applicability. And that's all I'm trying to say. I don't know where that bridge is, but it doesn't need to be an exact silicon copy. I don't want an exact silicon copy. I want a good enough copy. And we should be talking about, what are the goals of our modeling? What is the good enough? Why do we need a model at all? It's not to satisfy ourselves, though. I will stick to that, but we're going to say, well, we should do that too. And she still said it's to help people 30 years from now. It's not to help academics today. So she could tell us how she imagined it helping 30 years from now. And I can talk about how I can imagine it 30 years from now too. And we should be talking about our values and our goals and why we're doing this at all. Like, that's grounds the things at the end of the day. Like, and I share all the goals here. I think we all do, but we're taking guesses as to which goals will emerge from which movements on the modeling. That's ultimately what this boils down to.
Yeah. I guess the question is always, whether it's AI or neuroscience or whatever science you're doing, like, you need to sometimes step back and ask questions. So what am I doing? Am I really trying to maximize the probability of being accepted to New RIPS conference? Or I am trying to solve important problem? And important at what scale? So it's okay to optimize any of these functions, whether it's short-term or long-term, as long as you at least understand what you're optimizing and you are kind of honest about that, at least to yourself.
I think at the end of the day, there's an implicit value judgment about what is it that's worth explaining, right? And we kind of have an implicit value judgment that if you can explain the most experimental facts with the most parsimonious set of assumptions, and that's a beautiful, elegant, useful theory. And even more, if you could solve disease using that theory, it would be useful. So I think that's what kind of guides us. It might be worth teasing out more principles or heuristics we use to judge the value of a theory. But that's always been what kind of guides me. Try to explain the most with the least input and try to be useful in terms of engineering. or in
So
terms
it's
of solving
Occam's razor.
disease. Right.
Essentially Occam's razor.
It's Occam's razor, but also practical impact. Like, Feynman also said, that which I cannot build, I do not understand.
Yes.
Right? Like, can we build something? Like, can we cure disease? I don't see much room for philosophy there. Right? I mean, other than be logical, follow the scientific method, question all your assumptions, but like, I don't
depends
know.
what you mean by philosophy. For example, good example is what's going on with in the field of AI, AI safety, AI ethics, and all these questions, and the distribution of opinions about that, like whether while you're building, for example, recent successes of extremely large-scale models, GPT-3, CLIP, DALL-E, people keep building larger and larger ones. There is clearly something is going on. There is some transition of quantity into quality because those systems start exhibiting behaviors never exhibited before. And this whole scaling hypothesis, essentially saying that, existing models and algorithms, if scaled with compute, can kind of achieve drastically different and better intelligent behaviors. That seems to be interesting hypothesis. Again, it's just a hypothesis. There are lots of efforts, and people basically, some claim we're going to have AGI, I don't know, 20 years from now. Some say, well, never going to have it. I don't know. But what's going on is also people start thinking, and many people are concerned that when you build that, what kind of what kind of alignment with human values you want to impose. And so it immediately goes into philosophy and psychology and the question of ethics. And that's the territory of philosophers. And there are many who studied it over like hundreds of years. And just one example, kind of a bit popular at Mila, is say Derek Parfit and his 700 plus pages on what matters, where he tried to unify several ethics theories from the past years, including Kant and others. And he didn't finish that, basically trying to come up. It's an interesting hypothesis and question. Can you come up with objective ethics, which is pretty much as objective as physics? Is such thing that there is a lot there which is directly relevant to AI we're developing today. So I think we better read that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in terms of like moral philosophy, political philosophy, ethical philosophy, I think those are very interesting subjects. In terms of philosophy that can specifically help us do better neuroscience and build better AI, again, holding ethics of safety of AI aside, I just haven't seen much. I haven't found it that useful in my life. It could be because I'm uneducated and I would love to read stuff that you think would be very useful. Just email me and I'll take a look at it.
So by the way, you're more than welcome to join, at least online, our workshop. We had the neural scaling laws workshop with Jared Kaplan there and a few others.
I view that as a physics problem, actually.
Not
a philosophy problem.
Jared, being a physicist and trying to apply empirical approaches to studying complex dynamical systems, which are artificial, but who cares? Whether they're natural, like brain, or they're like finance, we're working with Morgan Stanley, for example, or they are artificial. They, at some point, start exhibiting interesting behaviors, and you can apply the same techniques to studying all those systems, and maybe even do some transfer between all that. But he is quite serious about alignment as well, because he's co-founder of Anthropic company. So it's not completely separate fields about how to, say, build, scale, and understand behavior of artificial systems and improve their functionality and capacity, while at the same time thinking about like social consequences of using such systems. And we had the debate at Mila for basically twice. We had the AGI debate in the past several weeks, trying to discuss those kind of questions, and it's ongoing. It's of course ongoing important thing. So we didn't start it, and we're not gonna finish it. But I think the things are quite related, and we should be aware of that. And perhaps what I was trying to say, we probably need to educate people more about those connections. So
I think Josh wanted to say something at some point.
Yeah, so Surya, I think the way you're thinking of philosophy feels to me like very restricted and unnecessarily so. For example, what I would say is the AI winters that we did not like as a field, and I suspect we would not like in the future, come from bad philosophy. People making extravagant claims based on poor assumptions about the nature of progress and how much we actually understand. It's not like scientific claims. The scientific claims they made were all fine. But the philosophical assumptions they had about what would be required to make progress were totally wrong. And therefore, they made egregious claims about our progress. And therefore, funding fell, interest fell, and we stopped making progress as a field. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, that you either do good philosophy, like Paul said, or bad philosophy. And we all do it all the time. You don't have to read a philosophy paper. You're making assumptions. You may call them meta-science, or you may call them physics if you prefer it. But the point is, it's not like running an experiment. It's thinking hard about which experiments to run, which data to collect. What are the implications of that? How will they change society? Who will they harm? Who will they help? And why? All those things for me are
that just strikes me as being a thoughtful person, right? And if you're going to make irresponsible predictions about the future, you're just not being a thoughtful person. Like, I thought we were talking about like the academic field of philosophy per se, right? Like that maybe we're just having a semantic discussion about the definition of philosophy, but yeah, I don't think.
Well, I guess it's because they've had that in that field. They've had these discussions. They've been having those discussions throughout all the rise and falls of AI, right? So we didn't have to have quite as big waves in the rise and falls of AI if we had sort of been always paying attention to that, in my opinion. I'd like to give a chance to some of the other people who asked questions. This is great. We could talk about this forever. But there was a couple other questions I'd like to give a chance for discussion. One was asked by Jawad Dabunu, who asks, you know that an airplane does not exactly copy a bird. Sure. In your opinion, in what way should an artificial neural network, especially not, try to copy a biological brain? In other words, what are the things about the brains that we're fairly confident are not really that important for our goal of understanding some particular capacity? I think that's what the question really is. So, I mean, anyone, please.
I got to jump in here. This is a great question, and hidden in your word is important. What are not important for understanding? So try to say it again without using that phrase. Like, it depends on your goal. If you're a bird and your wing is broken, you better hope that vet knows something about feathers. But if you're just trying to fly from California to New York, that may not matter, right? So this is this analogy of the plane sort of exposes the goals hidden behind why you're building a model, what you need it for. So I think the answer to that question depends on the goal, and that sort of the questioner has to sort of state the implicit goal. Is it just to build an algorithm that sees in the vision example? And what does seeing mean? Just match the behavior? You might not need neurons at all, by the way, for example, right? Do you need to know how CRISPR modifications to your genome are going to affect your visual behavior? You're probably going to need a multi-hierarchical model that goes all the way from genes up through models of the type that I was trying to explain where we are to get to that goal. But if you don't care how CRISPR mods affects your behavior as a human, you don't need such a thing necessarily. You may want it, but it's not needed. So the answer depends dramatically on the goals. And if we just use the word understand, we're just not engaging with that value-driven discussion, to Surya's point here.
So, but staying away from the extremes. So obviously you don't need every molecule. But in your particular field, then, what are the things that you think are potentially that someone might say you need to know, but you believe that maybe you don't need to know for the purpose of your research of understanding visual intelligence?
For me, I would say
the particular things in the brain that you know about that you don't think are as critical.
But again, think about relevant for what goals. I have multiple goals, they're all there, right? So AI, I don't think I need to know about the synapse details. For CRISPR mods and like how they would improve health, I have an MD. Like, I'm probably going to need to know some of that, right? So it's not a one or it's not a yes or no. It's all of that depending on your goals. And right now our fields are sort of together, and if we talk about the AI goals, it frames it in one way, and we could answer the question. So I can make guesses given that framing, which is maybe what you're asking, Paul. I just wouldn't say don't use the word understand there, because you're leaving out a whole bunch of important neuroscience who also thinks they want to understand those other goals. So I'm sorry I keep saying that, but I think that's the core thing. We could all talk about what are our dreams of why do we build models in the first place? What are each of our dreams and our values and what they're going to be used for? Like that would be a good discussion to have.
Okay, well, I think I'll need to wrap it up. Does anyone else want to maybe add something to that?
I just have a very quick question. Will the chat be saved?
Yes, it will be available, although I'm not sure exactly how easy it is to pass through. But yes, there is a really good chat. I'm looking forward actually to reading it when I get a chance. Unfortunately, I only have one brain.
Right.
Okay, I just would like
So we
to.
need to scale it.
Yeah, we'll split it. I just want to, upon finishing up, I just want to make a couple of small announcements. That we're going to have a lunch break. It's going to be a bit shorter. What's the timing? We're going to reconvene at 1:20.
Normal time.
The normal time. Okay, so it's going to be a shorter lunch. Sorry, everyone. But I'm sure you'll be happy once we get to the next talks. There will be some lightning talks that are video recorded that will be played during the lunch break. You can find on the website. You can also find selected abstracts. There were some abstracts submitted, and also we encourage you to check out the main job board, which is available again on the website. And finally, just want to say, for those of you who are in Montreal, we can really continue these discussions properly at the social tomorrow evening over beer and pizza and poutine and things like that. So again, find that information on the website. Hope to see you all there. All right. With that, I'll thank you all again, all the panelists, Jim, Josh, Surya, and Irina, for a very stimulating discussion. I wish we had another hour.
Over beers?
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.